But if you have a desire, whether you know exactly what your message is or you just know God's calling you to share something, this is what I want you to do. I want you to sit down with Jesus and say, "Okay, who who do you want me to serve? What is the problem that you solve for her? God's given you a message. Are you willing to trust him enough to go share it?"
Hey guys, it's Melissa Moore. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of Faith, Hope, Love, where we grow together in our faith, increase in hope, and learn how to better love God and love other people. On today's episode, we are nearing the end of our Momentum series, which is based off of Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. We've talked about moving on from the things that hold us back, moving forward in health, and now we're in the section of moving others, where we've talked about what it looks like for us to use our gifts in a way that encourages and inspires others. Today we are joined by R Snyder, and she is a speaker, a coach, a message mastermind. She's an event planner. Mary literally does all of the things. And today she's going to share with us a little bit about what it looks like for us to learn how to use our God-given gifts of speaking so that we can share our stories with women, inspiring them and encouraging them to move forward in faith. So, Mary, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If you wouldn't mind, if you could please share a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump on in.
I would love to. Hey, y'all, I'm Mary R. Snyder. I am everything that Melissa said. And here's the things I don't do: windows, floors, and I really don't care for laundry. So those are my things. So, so I like to, do the things that I love. And the thing I love the most is working with speakers who know that God is calling them. They may not even know what their message is yet, but they know there is this burning desire to share what Jesus is doing with others, because that's who I was over 20 years ago. So that's me.
Again, thank you so much, Mary, for taking the time to jump on the show. I just wanted to say how much I've personally appreciated and how much I've learned from you on what it looks like to speak and hone your craft. I know for myself, the Facebook group that you have has been so awesome and super encouraging. I've joined that in the last year, and it has been so inspiring to me seeing other women that are speakers that have started out around the same time that I did, that are really growing and learning together. So that's been such an encouraging space. And also, your podcast has been super informative. I watch that often. I listen to it sometimes in the car on the way to pick up my kids from school or when I'm washing dishes. And I just love it. I feel like you put so much amazing content out there to encourage and inspire women that are wanting to use their stories. Before we really jump into how you do that, I would love to hear a little bit of your story with how you began speaking. How did you know that you were called by God to speak?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, I can't tell you time, but I can tell you place and general vicinity of year, which I base around the ages of my children who are now grown women. But my youngest was in grammar school. I had just left a Bible study. It was a Beth Moore Bible study. We all did Beth Moore back in the day, and we still do. Not saying you don't, but we had left. It was me and my neighbor, Pat, who wonderful woman. And I told Pat, I said, that's what I'm going to do. That's what God's doing in my life. I want to do what she does. She goes, "You want to be Beth Moore?" And she said it in she was such a gracious person, but I took it as, you're trying to be like her, like you think you're something. It shut me down a little bit. But I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt, Melissa, that I was watching this woman on this platform truly serving the women in her audience. It wasn't about what the platform, it was about how she had this passion to share her message with others. That's what I knew I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to tell women how good Jesus is, how great life with him is, and how it matters to walk with him. And I knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I didn't have a clue how to do that, but I knew that God was calling me to this. So I sat down and I said, "Okay, Jesus, I guess we're going to do this. How are we doing this?" And I just waited. And nobody showed up, strangely enough. And I finally figured out it's just like if God had called me to be a teacher. I had to go get myself some education. I had to figure out all about the speaking thing. And then I had to go out and let the world know I was a speaker. So I did all of those things over the course of several years and started speaking locally and then went nationally. I've spoken in Mexico. That's sort of international, um, but I've never spoken overseas. I've never gone overseas to speak. But I shifted in that season to going behind the scenes. I started doing event planning and I love that. And I started producing and I love that. And so here we are today, fast forward. And I've been coaching for about 7 or 8 years and started a podcast during the pandemic because didn't everybody? Listen, we all did. I started 2 during the pandemic. One was called the Not So Official Podcast. It was no rhyme or reason to what I was doing. I was bored and slightly stir crazy. So me and a friend did that one. And then I started Take the Stage because I knew I loved podcasting because it allowed me to share all this 20 plus years of relationships I had with other speakers and then knowledge. And I just said, Jesus, if I'm going to do this, let's do something that matters. And here we are.
Mary, thank you so much just for taking the time just to share some of your story and that moment that you felt God really put it on your heart to do this with Beth Moore. I know for me, I've had those moments where I'm like, I'm watching a speaker and I just had this moment where I'm like, that's what I want to do. Like if I could do anything, that's what I would love to do is speak and encourage and inspire women. So I just appreciate you taking the time to do that. I know for me, when I started speaking, my first speaking gig was like right before COVID happened. And so I had like a little taste of what it's like. And then everything just kind of got shut down. And that's actually why I started this podcast, is so I could continue doing the things I felt called to do virtually rather than in person. And so I think that's what's so cool about speaking is that, speaking can look so many different ways, whether you're on a stage or speaking in a small group setting with women or doing a podcast. I mean, there's so many ways that you can get the message out. So Mary, I would just love, for maybe the woman that's watching this, that she's feeling called to speak or share her story in some way. Mary, if you could maybe give some practical tips or some steps that she can begin taking to get started on that journey.
Absolutely. And those are my favorite ones. So, first of all, I want you to join the Facebook group, Take the Stage Speakers, because it is a workshop. I really think, I don't think of it as a group. It's a working workshop because these are some of the things that women do. Before we get to what you're going to do, and we're going to get to that in a second, but people throw up their one sheet. And if you don't know what a one sheet is, that's okay. It's your speaker page. It's one page, it's like a one-page resume, but very focused on the event planner and how you'll serve that audience. So they put them up there. Everybody speaks into it. I speak into it, but the group has gotten so educated that they do the work too. They're like, "Oh no, Mary says don't do that or do it this way." And I always say that I have the experience. I'm a unicorn. I've got the speaking experience and the event planner. I've worn both hats. But if you have a desire, whether you know exactly what your message is or you just know God's calling you to share something, this is what I want you to do. I want you to sit down with Jesus and say, "Okay, who who do you want me to serve?" And I want you to think about one person. I know this is going to feel strange because you're going to say, "No, I want to speak to everybody." Everybody, because that's me. I want to speak to all the people. We're going to talk about one. And the reason you're going to talk about one, and I'll tell you who my one is. Her name is Heather. She has 2 children. One is in college, one is in high school. And Heather has known for years that she was called to speak. She's known this, she's felt it, but now it's become this burning desire to move forward. So this is what I want Heather to do. I want her to sit down, and this is what I want you to do, whether your name's Heather or not. I want you to sit down with Jesus and I want you to write down what is the problem that you solve for her. Think about it. Now, I'm going to tell you the problem I solve. I solve the problem of I have a desire to speak and I don't know where to start. So it can be a problem like that. You may say, you know what? I solve how to be joyful in difficult situations. That's the problem I solve. What is the thing God has taken you through? What is the thing God has taken you through? And how will you serve the audience? So, and listen, y'all, if you hear my dogs barking, it's just a thing. So we're just going to let it go. Okay. That's called real life. That's called real life. But I want you to think about that first. Okay. That's the first thing you're going to do. And then I want you to think about what is your message? And I want you to think about how does your message serve her? So you're going to tell her your story. What we tend to do as speakers is we want to get away from our story, but I want you to think about how your story serves her. And here's why I want you to think this: your story and her pain point, where do they intersect? And don't pull yourself out of the story. Oftentimes, speakers want to do this. They just want to tell the solution, they don't want to give the problem. And here's why you're going to give the problem and you're going to share. And it's not easy because that's where she's going to meet you and say, hey, me too. I've had that same problem. I was there too. That's why it's so important to meet her right where she is. So let that be your very first thing of homework. And then you're going to start reaching out to area churches and you're going to ask them to let you speak. And here's what you're going to say: you're not going to say, I want to speak on your stage. You're going to call all the people you know, all those friends and family that always want to do stuff for you. And you're going to say, will you help me? And they're going to say, of course I'll help you, Melissa. And you're going to say, I have a message. Uh, they may know your story. They may know some of your story. And you can even say, hey, you know what I've been through these last few years. God is really pushing me to start sharing this story. Do you know anybody? You have any connection with any of the local churches that you might connect me to? You're not asking them to put you on a stage. You're not asking you to introduce. You're not saying, introduce me. You're just saying, I want to share my story. It's a very different ask. So that's your homework. That's going to get you rolling. And then I want you to come over to our group and tell us how can I serve you? How can we serve you? What do you need? Get to know other speakers. Build a tribe, a community of speakers. It's a great community, and you know what? We get each other cuz we understand what it means when you know you're called to do this.
I love what you've shared. And I know for myself, I'm currently in my early 30s and I have two young kids at home. And there's so many doubts that I have telling me that, man, you're never going to be good at this, or you're never going to succeed at this. You're never going to get, speaking gigs. Like, it's just not going to happen. And I feel like so many of us come into this with so many doubts and reasons why we shouldn't do it. And I feel like, again, the podcast Facebook group has been so helpful in being able to see different women at different spots in their journey with this. And I think the thing that has really hit me is that you just got to start. We just got to start now. And, starting small, again, your Facebook group gives so many amazing steps for how to do that and kind of shows how. But I totally feel like we just have to start now.
You do. You absolutely. I was in my early 30s when I started speaking. I'm not in my early 30s now, just in case y'all were curious. It's okay. Listen, my children are grown. It is such a sweet season. But you're exactly right. I remember some of the very first messages I gave were really just kind of cotton candy. And I say that graciously because I didn't really have anything to share. But I'm gonna tell you, and I'm gonna not warn you, but just remind you that when God calls you to something like this, He's gonna do a work in you. He's gonna do a work in you. And your message doesn't have to be hard and heavy to be powerful. One of my speakers speaks on the topic of hospitality, and it is so good and so needed. But it's not a hard story. It's not like, I lost a limb or something in a bike accident. I mean, not that I've lost a limb in anything accident, but people have, and they have those stories and they're powerful. But your story doesn't have to be dark and devastating to be equally as powerful.
I just appreciate you sharing that. I just know for myself, when I, first started speaking, so much of the way that I approached speaking was I have my story to tell. I've got these 5 to 10 Bible verses that fit in with that, and I'm gonna give it to, I'm just gonna throw it out there. And I just kind of had this like, I want to encourage, I want to inspire, I want to fire people up. And unfortunately, like, I wasn't taking into account, where are the women at that I'm speaking to? Is that what they need right now? And I love that you talk about that we need to understand the heartfelt need of the women in the room, so that we can not just be sharing our story for the sake of sharing it, but seeing what the needs are of the women listening and being able to fit our story into meeting that need. Man, I love that. I love that.
Yep. Absolutely. And that's the key is, and we all do that. We all start this thing where we're just teaching at people. I always say you're like on the mountaintop teaching down to the people down below. I was not qualified to do that. And here's the thing, nobody wants that. We want people that we relate to, that people that have been the people that you can lean in and go, "Oh my gosh, I'm like her." We we may not be exactly alike, but we've got some similarities. I get this story because the minute they say that, they start leaning forward. And that's when the Lord starts doing a work. Never forget, and this is the thing I always encourage speakers, uh, you are called to serve. It is the most servant position. It looks glamorous. People think, "Oh, you get to travel to all the places on the planes." Have y'all been on a plane lately? They make you take a mask on the whole time. Nothing glamorous about air travel. But it, it is a huge blessing, but it also is, it's a lot because you're taking time away from your family. You are going out to serve a community of people that you will likely never communicate with again. I mean, short of Facebook or some connection that way, these are not people you're going to be doing life with. So oftentimes, this side of heaven, you won't really know the impact that your message had. Sometimes people will tell you, and that's such a blessing, but you will go and you will pour out and pour out. And then you'll go to the next place and you'll do it over again. And you'll do it over again. And you know it's your calling when you step off that stage and you're like, wow, I love this. And it's not because people are clapping or amening you, it's because people are leaning in. And it's because you're sharing what God has given you. I always say God entrusts you with his message. He's given you a very specific message. And Melissa, this is what I love about speakers because everybody's like, well, I speak just like I have the same message as Melissa. We have the exact same message. No, you don't. And here's why. You're two different people. Your life experience and my life experience are two different. We could teach the same topics, use the same scripture references, pretty much everything except our stories will be different because your stories and my stories are different. And it could be on almost exactly the same. Some people will resonate with me and some people will resonate with you. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That's why God's entrusted each one of us. And for you who's watching me right now, it, you've God's given you a message. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. Are you willing to trust him enough to go share it? Because the message you have, the story you're going to share is her hope. You see, God's equipped you. He's entrusted you with this message. He's gifted this message to you. And he also knows who needs this message. And he's preparing for the two of you to intersect if you say yes. is we have free will. If you say no, or, I'm just going to wait till somebody calls me on my telephone and says, hey, we don't know who you are. We've never heard of you, but we're going to ask you to come speak. They're not here. Newsflash, nobody's going to do that. You're going to have to do the work. Let the world know you're a speaker. But if you do the work, I'm telling you, God is going to show up and you are going to be blown away. And I'm going to be honest, it's not easy work, but nothing that is worth anything typically comes very easy. It takes time. Like you said, you started a couple of years ago. So, Melissa, you started speaking like right before COVID hit. Wow, that is a great timing, sister.
Honestly, no, it was really hard and frustrating, frankly, to be feeling like I'm doing what God is calling me to do. I'm starting speaking and trying to hone that craft, and all of a sudden, God, you're just pushing, completely pushing the brakes, and everything had just all of a sudden stopped. And at first, I had to grieve that, but then I had a situation where I stopped and I was like, God, what do you want to teach me through this? And it was really cool. Like this last year and a half, I've learned so much. I was able to see, man, I have a story to tell, but the way that I was presenting it maybe wasn't ideal. It wasn't the very best it could be. I needed to hone my craft. I needed to figure out how to share that story well. And also, it gave me time to work through some of the emotional stuff that was behind my story. And I think when we're sharing from a place that's really difficult, if we haven't fully addressed that or healed, we're not able to present the hope or the light at the end of the tunnel for women that are listening. And man, I feel like God really allowed me the time and space to do that work. I'm obviously doing a podcast was super helpful because it gave me a weekly opportunity to practice speaking and yeah, honing that part of the craft. So I love it. And again, I appreciate what you just shared. I want to throw a little curveball at you here. You share a little bit about sharing difficult stories. And so, with that, you know, obviously it's important for us to be authentic and vulnerable when we share our stories, especially those that are more difficult. But how much is too much? Like, where's that line when it's no longer helpful to share the nitty gritty? And, what are your thoughts on that? How do we share our stories in a way that is authentic and real, but is actually truly beneficial for our listeners?
I think that first of all, when you're sharing a hard story, make sure you're sharing from your scars, not your wounds. Make sure you're healed. Make sure you're healed because wounded people, and we've all seen it, and I've done it. Wounded people are not ready to share. They often overshare. And I like to share enough to where anyone who's walked through it can lean in and say, I get you. And I'm going to reference Beth Moore in this. Beth Moore has often through the years shared that she has abuse in her background. But if you've ever listened to her, she never goes into detail. She always keeps it way up here. She lets you know that she is a survivor, but she doesn't get into the deep details. Here's a good rule of thumb. How much do they need to know to understand what God has taught you? How much do they need to know? And it may be a lot. I have a speaker within our body of speakers who is sharing on some mental health issues. That's a tough one, but she gets pretty raw because that's what she knows. That's what people need to hear from her. Another speaker can say, no, you know what? I don't need to tell them all the raw stuff. I just need them to know this is what I've walked through and just kind of keep it highbrow. It's very much what God's called you to. And again, how much do you need to share so they can lean in and walk with you through the healing process? Because if you just leave it at the sharing process and there's no healing, then you just you just raked them over the coals and left them for dead. So don't do that.
Man, I absolutely agree. I have so appreciated what you just shared, and it's something that I've been really processing through. Because I feel like there's this potential of like, if you have a really heavy story, to come up on stage and almost like dump it, like we're in a therapy session. And I know for myself, I've been on both ends of that, being the speaker that is probably overshared, as well as being in the audience of someone that is just sharing so much, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's beautiful, the analogy you shared with sharing out of our scars rather than our wounds. And I think when we've taken the time, God has helped us to heal from the difficult stories. That's the place that we can then share out of that, to show women it's possible to get through what you're going through. And I feel like that can apply to so many difficult topics. But I love that. Man, I just feel like we could be here all day on this. We could really, there's so much to cover. A big part of speaking, obviously, being understanding your niche, like that specific topic that you're supposed to call, you're called to talk on, as well as being able to hone your message, hone your craft. So, Mary, what are some of the resources that you provide that kind of help women to do that?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, there's the podcast. There's a year's worth of episodes, y'all. Everything, and I just recorded 3. So just so coming up, you've got things like how to say thank you. I know that sounds so simple, but it is a powerful tool that we use as speakers. And the written thank you note. I also did one recently on how to speak at hybrid events. I go and I have topics like how to captivate your audience in the first 7 seconds, how to open your message. Everything is in there. And also, I have a course that I teach about 3 times a year called Activate Your Speaking Career. It opens in January of 2022. So it's a while, depending on when you're listening to this, but it opens in January of 2022. And I teach A to Z how to activate your speaking career. Everything from crafting your message, finding your audience, connecting with event planners, creating your very own sizzle reel, everything. So I do that, like I said, 3 times a year. I open that up, and then obviously go to my website, maryrSnyder.com, and you can find there all manner. I've got resources there. I've got obviously all the episodes are there with show notes and links and all that kind of stuff. And again, the free Facebook group is a great place. Oh, and I have something new, Melissa. I'm going to tell you. I have a texting community. So you can actually text me and ask me a question. 205-964-5337. So 205-964-5337, and you can text me. I mean, people text me questions. One person said, "Well, what if I text you a prayer request?" I said, "Well, then I'll pray for you." That's a little bit like, we'll do that, okay? So, yeah, it's fun. I'm loving that. That's because I love texting and I can do it on the fly. And it's a great way to minister just one-on-one, which is what I love.
I just wanted to say too, I just have been so appreciative of all the tools you've provided, not just putting out a podcast and creating content to teach women, but you've also been engaging, like giving your number out and providing a Facebook group. I think it's so cool that you're doing so much to help and encourage other women to use their stories. And it's funny, I don't know if you noticed when we first started talking, I was like sitting back here, but as we have continued talking, I've been finding myself leaning in. I just am so drawn into your message. Obviously, I admire you as a speaker and as a teacher. I love hearing you speak, but I just admire you as someone that is a leader and equipping other women. I mean, that's all of like what I want to do with this podcast, is see women be equipped to use their God-given gifts to change the world. And gosh, I so respect what you do. I even have a couple of my close friends, Sue Donaldson and Listen to Halls, that are in that speakers group. And it's been so inspiring for me to see how much their speaking has taken off in like the last year since joining your group. It is just so inspiring and encouraging. And I'm so hopeful and expectant, not only for myself as a speaker, but for those that are listening and watching right now, that if this is something that God has put on your heart, I know that the Facebook group is an amazing, amazing first step to really get that ball rolling. And even if you're right now just considering it, maybe this is something God has put on my heart to do, hop in that Facebook group. It is such an amazing place to start, just to kind of see God working in the lives of other women. It's so inspiring, so encouraging. Gosh, Mary, I'm so in awe of you and so thankful for all you do.
Absolutely. And what I love, y'all, is a part of that group is I want to know when you're speaking. I want to put it on my calendar. So when you go on that stage, I get a reminder that says, "Hey, Melissa's stepping on stage. You need to stop and pray." And even if it's just, I just literally throw up, Lord, I know she's stepping on that stage in 15 minutes. I want you right in the midst of this with her. Walk her through it. Don't allow her to be nervous, but let her be excited. And that is what I get to do, Melissa. I get to do that, and when people tell me about their events, I'm like a proud mama. I mean, I'm over here going, "Y'all look at my girls. Look at my girls over there." I mean, I'm super proud. I love it. It's just the way God's smiling down and allowing, me my yes to this call on my life, um, which I never anticipated would go the way it's going, has truly blessed me more than I could ever, truly ever ask or imagine. So I thank the Lord that I get to do this.
Absolutely. And I want to say it again. If you're feeling this call that you feel like you're supposed to be sharing your story, but you don't know where to start, maybe you have some fears and doubts and concerns, you don't feel qualified enough, or you just don't know what to do to start, please join that group. I know for me, I was in that same space a year ago, and it has been so encouraging and so inspiring to see other women that are on the same journey with the same fears and concerns as me. And I know it'll be an encouraging space for you as well. So if you have even an inkling of a doubt or a feeling that maybe, man, this is something that God may be calling me to, just join the group, check it out. And I know that everything that Mary offers is so awesome and super encouraging and will be a huge, huge step in starting out in boldness and speaking the message that God has put on your heart, the thing that He's created you for. So, Mary, again, thank you so much for joining us today. And for all of you watching, I hope you were encouraged today. I'll see you back here next week.